before I forget to do this, I'm going to read the set aside prayer that we read last week. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my disease, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth. So, last week, you guys had homework. Did any of you find out you weren't alcoholics? You're here by mistake? Or did you identify with Bill? You did. Was there anything in 9 through 16 that Bill did that you're not willing to do? Good, then we can proceed. Good stuff. So last week, one of the things we learned was that uh, um, physically, the reason we're powerless physically was because of the allergy, right? The phenomenon of craving. And that's what sets the alcoholic apart from a normal person. A normal person never, ever, ever has the phenomenon of craving. So that's why we're powerless physically. But we're gonna go a little deeper today. I think we stopped on the top of 19, did we not? So then he says, right after we read about the good sponsor, and then right after that, the next paragraph, the first full paragraph, second sentence says, we feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. So drinking isn't the solution, it's just the beginning, not drinking. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes and our occupations and affairs. I'm sorry, we're on page 19. Sentence of the first full paragraph. And now I'm going a little bit further down on 19. In that same paragraph, the second to last sentence says, many could recover if they have the opportunity I have enjoyed. It says we have enjoyed it. I want you to know most of the time, I'm going to try and read this first person. Where it says we, I'm going to say I, or sometimes I may say Ray. If you read the book in that way, it'll take on a whole new meaning for you and a whole new power. I'm so self-centered, when I see we, I think they're talking about you. So it'll really help you if you put remember I told you to take these statements and turn them into questions. We're trying to consider, is this me? Do I suffer from what we're talking about here? So let's go over to page 20. How many of you have heard said in a meeting, this is a selfish program? Well, let's read the first sentence on the top of 20. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Those people that say that aren't reading this book. And that's just one example of how far the fellowship has drifted from the message in the book. Okay, that first full paragraph says, you may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? Most alcoholics really aren't going to ask you that. But that's a very hard thing for an alcoholic to do. The only thing harder than this for an alcoholic to do is say, I don't know. Next sentence, it is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Remember I said it's like a recipe book? I don't want to learn it. I want to do what they did because I want to get the results they got. Now, now he's that next paragraph. How many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone? Why can't he? This is all that emotional appeal, frothy emotional appeal that we read in the doctor's opinion. And it says, now these are, I'm in the next paragraph down. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. I sponsored a guy. I met a guy in Hawaii in the 80s. I was over there doing the show Magnet PI, and I met this doctor, and he had almost lost his license. And they were going to let him try to get his license back if he agreed to be the emergency room surgeon 6 months at a time for 2 years straight. If you guys know what an emergency room surgeon does, I said to him, he had asked me if I would sponsor him. And I said to him, are you sure you want to be a doctor? You're going to sleep about 2 hours a night for the next 2 years. He said he wanted to do it. And so part of the deal was the guy that was the head of the AMA in all the Hawaiian Islands, I had to talk to him as Tom's sponsor. I had to talk to him once a month. And I'm telling you, this guy was the top doctor over there. They don't understand alcoholism. He'd say, man, Tom's doing great. And I said, you're not hearing what I'm saying. And he said, well, what are you saying? I said, I'm saying that I may be drunk tomorrow and the Tom the next day. He just couldn't get what alcoholism was. They are never going to understand why we drink. And I'm never going to understand why they didn't. And that's just the way it is. And so, don't expect the non-alcoholic to understand you because they're not gonna. Now, let's look at, so he says, we see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. Now, I'm going to check to see where I stand in this thing. Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. Could Ray take it or leave it alone? No. Well, I'm not a moderate drinker. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need a medical attention. Okay. Could Ray do that? Nope. I had all the I was married 6 times in my life. I fell in love a lot. So you can see that this stuff, I wasn't a hard drinker. I wasn't a moderate drinker. Let's see what's left. But what about the real alcoholic? Boom, there I am. He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. There I am. That's me. I don't know if I said it last week, but I'm going to say it now. When you say powerless, put 2 other words with that. We don't have any power. We don't have any control. We don't have any choice. Those 3 words are synonymous for us. And if that's true of you, then you suffer from what I suffer from. Let's turn over to page 22. Make sure I'm not skipping anything here. Last paragraph. We know that while Ray keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once Ray takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for Ray to stop. The experience will abundantly confirm this. My experience abundantly confirmed what I just read. Abundantly. Now he says, the academic and pointless if Ray never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, Ray's main problem centers in his mind rather than his body. Geez, alcoholism is a mental illness. Wow. I thought that was for people in the white jackets, but not necessarily so. So, and what's so important about this, we're on the top of 23, right? We're not going to talk about the alcoholic with alcohol in him anymore. We know why the physical thing happens. But from 23 to 43, we're going to be talking about us with no alcohol in us. I was weird when I drank and I was weirder when I didn't. I only got two problems with alcohol. One happens when I drink it, and the other one happens when I don't. That's what they're trying to tell you. If you ask Ray why he started on the last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. You know those justifications and rationalizations. And also I want to point out right now that from page 23 to 164, we're not talking about the alcoholic drinking. Now, there were 7+ pages, Roman numerals, in the doctor's opinion. So 7 and 23 is 30. So 30 out of 164 pages talk about alcohol. The rest of them don't. You think our problem is alcohol? Now it says, once in a while, Ray may tell the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is that usually Ray has no more idea when he took the first drink than you.
I don't know.
Some drinkers have excuses which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really don't know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. How true this is, few realize. In a vague way, their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal. Abnormal. That my picture would have been there. But everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse from his lethargy and assert his power of will. We'll find out more about that power of will in a little while, too. It's very depressing. The tragic truth is that if the man be a real alcoholic, and now I know I'm a real alcoholic because we just read that, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. What's the only requirement for membership? At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop is of absolutely no avail. The desire to stop drinking may earn me a seat, but it doesn't earn me sobriety or recovery. That's what it's saying right there. Now we got the squiggly writing again. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. How many times have you heard a guy stand up in a meeting and say, I chose not to drink today? Really? He doesn't suffer from what I suffer from. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. A lot of years ago, definitely over 46 years ago, I spent a weekend in Twin Towers in LA. You know, that's the men's jail. They arrested me on a Thursday and I got out on Sunday about 7. And at 10 o'clock Sunday night, I was in a blackout in a fight in a bar in Tarzana. And if the owner hadn't locked me in his office, I'd have been back in jail. So just squiggly right and pay attention to this stuff. How many times have you heard somebody say in a meeting, think the drink through? Let's read them and see if we can dispel that middle of the road solution. The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, which implies they may not, they are hazy and readily supplanted by the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. If I told you the trouble I had with drinking and then went out and drank again, I'd be putting my hand on that stove every 2 seconds. And we need to start to see the insanity of ourselves. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, it won't burn me this time, so here's how. Now listen to this. Remember the guy said, think the drink through. Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. Let's go down to the last paragraph. When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid. Remember last week we found out that hopeless was beyond human aid? What's the fellowship made up of? I guess they're not going to help me. And unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop, but can't. So now we're mentally. We already learned why we're powerless physically because of the phenomenon of craving, but now we're learning why I'm mentally. I have no defense. It must come from a higher power. Now, if you believe what I'm saying, then pay a lot of attention because here's squiggly right, and there is a solution. Ray didn't like the self-searching and the leveling of his pride and the confession of shortcomings which the process requires for its successful consummation. But when Ray saw that it really worked in others, and I had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as I had been living it, when therefore I was approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for me but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at my feet. This book is the simple kit of tools laid at my feet. And I want you to notice, because they'll tell you, you know, the steps are just suggestions. Just do them however you want, when you want, whatever. Well, this thing to me says that this thing requires this. This is a process, and it requires for its successful consummation that I do these are what he just described to us was the steps. The soul searching, the leveling of our pride. He's talking about the steps. Now, next paragraph. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way that is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. You think a therapist can do that for you? Do you see the asterisk up there about where it says effective spiritual experiences? Let's go back to page 567 in the book for a minute. And we're going to read Appendix 2, the spiritual experience. Are you all there? The term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which, upon careful reading, shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. Though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. I've been here 46 and a half years. That's a lie. The only one I know that had one was Bill. And I read that. I don't know if he was hallucinating or this really happened. But that guy that helped me when I was new, that came in 1941, he used to say when he read it, he said it happens to about one out of every 50,000. So don't wait for it. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of difference long before he is himself. Now, I want to give you an experience I had. I had about, I don't know, between 2 or 3 years. And I'm driving down to Palm Springs from LA with my girlfriend and my mom. And it's August. And it's about 110 out. And as we come off the 10 onto the 111 coming into Palm Springs, I have a flat tire. And I pull over and I get out of the car and I change the tire and I get back in the car. And we're driving on into Palm Springs. And we drive a couple of miles and my mom says, "What has happened to you?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "You had a flat tire. You got out of the car and changed it. You got back in. You looked like you'd been in a sauna." And she said, "You never cursed one time or blamed God or us." I hadn't realized I had changed. My reaction to life had changed from who I used to be. I didn't even know it had happened. I wasn't trying to bring that change about. I just doing what these old guys told me to do because I had learned to love and respect them. And that's a spiritual experience. Does that make any sense to any of you? So, He finally realizes he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Later in this book, we're going to read where God is, and He's inside of us. And that's why this is an unsuspected inner resource. When you hate yourself as much as I hated me when I got here, you're not going to look in you for God. I can guarantee you that. So most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. Burn that squiggly writing into you, please. I just showed you that there was an asterisk that said to read this. There's 2 more of them later in the book. 3 times they asked us to come back here and read this. And it says, these are indispensable. If I'm not willing, open-minded, and honest, I am not getting recovery and I'm not having a spiritual experience. I have to do these things. Then it says there is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. Herbert Spencer. Now let's go back to page 25 where we were. So just so you get this spiritual experience in your mind, what we just read. So look at the bottom of page 27. It says for amplification, see spiritual experience. Appendix 2 in the back of the book. Turn to page 47. Bottom of the page, asterisk, please be sure to read Appendix 2 on spiritual experience. We have bad memories. Now it says, bottom paragraph 25. If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle of the road solution. Middle of the road solution. Think the drink through. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Talk about yourself every day and get sicker. That's what they're talking about. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, there it is again, we had but 2 alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the conscious intolerable situation as best we could. The other, to accept spiritual help. Let's turn over to page 26. A certain American businessman, they're talking about Roland Hazard, had ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. Now listen to what they say. He had consulted the best known American psychiatrist. He said he has been to all the best psychiatrists in the United States at this time. His family, Roland's family, was a very, very wealthy family, they were very good business people, and they wanted to give their business to their son, Roland. But Roland was a terrible drunk, and they knew that something had to change. And that's why they sent him to all these best known American psychiatrists. But he couldn't quit drinking. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of a celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Carl Jung, who prescribed for him. Carl Jung at that time, Freud and Jung were the best known psychiatrists in the world. Thank God he went to Jung instead of, otherwise we'd have been all blaming our mothers. So, though experience made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. Now, he's already been through all the best American psychiatrists, so he knows what psychiatry is. But he is so impressed with Carl Jung. Let's see what it says. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. He didn't even make it back to America. He drank before he got back to America. My alcoholic ego tells me I'm different. I'm fine. I'm never going to drink again. That's what Roland's told him. Let's go over to the top of page 27. So Roland just can't believe he got drunk. He cannot believe it. He thinks when he's with Jung, he thinks he's at the top human power there is in the world, because he's already been to all the Americans and he loved what Jung did with him. So he goes back to the doctor and he says to the doctor, is there no way that this can happen? The doctor said on top of 27, second full paragraph, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you. Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, is there no exception? Yes, replied Jung. There is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while. They don't happen often. Alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. The doctor doesn't understand them. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, my thinking, emotions, my feelings, and attitudes, my beliefs, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions, thinking, and motives begin to dominate them. What happened to emotions and attitudes? He says, a new set of conceptions. When my thinking changes, my feelings change. When my feelings change, my attitudes change, my beliefs. I didn't know that I had a belief. I had the belief of a victim. They're subtle. These beliefs are very subtle. When you're a victim, it's everybody else's fault. And you're not going to look at you. And you resent the whole world. But now I'm going to let these spiritual principles are going to motivate my thinking, my behavior, how I am. And Jung says to him, in fact, I have been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods which I employed are successful. What methods would Carl Jung have employed? Psychiatric and therapeutic, right? I have never been successful with any of your description. Therapy doesn't work for us. If I'm the problem and I go there and talk about me an hour a week, I'm getting sicker. I'm not getting better. And it's so important. Let me read you something else. You asked me about this. I'm giving it to you full blast now. This spiritual experience. You know, the kaboom or whatever you want to call it that Bill had in his room. I'm going to read in January 23rd of 1961. Bill Wilson realized, oh my God, we owe Dr. Jung our thanks. He's the one that gave us the solution. Dr. Jung gave it to Roland. Roland gave it to Ebby. Ebby gave it to Bill. And he realized it and he felt terrible about it. And he wrote Dr. Jung a long letter. Dr. Jung didn't know who Bill Wilson was. But Bill Wilson writes in this letter, and I have the whole letter. You can get it. It's on the internet, I promise you. But what's more important was that Jung wrote him back. And Jung didn't live a whole lot longer than when he returned Bill's letter. And I'm going to read you Dr. Jung's letter to Bill. He says to Dear Mr. W., your letter has been very welcome indeed. I had no news from Roland H. anymore and often wondered what had been his fate. The reason that I could not tell him everything was that in those days, I had to be exceedingly careful of what I said. I had found out that I was misunderstood in every possible way. Here's a doctor telling a guy, God can fix you, but I can't. Doctors don't like that. He would have gotten in a lot of trouble, so he had to be careful what he said to him. But basically what he said to him is, I can't do it better than God. I had found out that I was misunderstood in every possible way. Thus, I was very careful when I talked to Roland. But what I really thought about was the result of many experiences with men of his kind. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. How could one formulate such an insight in a language that is not misunderstood in our days? He's going to tell you now how to have this, what this experience is. The only right and legitimate way to such an experience is that it happens to you in reality. And it can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads you to a higher understanding. You might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. I see from your letter that Roland has chosen the second way, because what Roland did was when he came back after that last visit, he hooked up with the Oxford group. And they weren't a religion, they were a spiritual group. And Roland never drank again. He had his spiritual experience through the Oxford group because they explained they had something they called 6 tenets. And it's what turned into eventually our 12 steps. Anyways, here's what he goes on to say. I am strongly convinced that the evil principle prevailing in this world leads to the unrecognized spiritual need into perdition. If it is not counteracted either by real religious insight or by a protective wall of human community. An ordinary man not protected by an action from above and isolated in society cannot resist the power of evil, which is called very aptly the devil. But the use of such words arouses so many mistakes that one can only keep aloof from them as much as possible. These are the reasons why I could not give a full and sufficient explanation to Roland. But I am risking it with you because I conclude from your very decent and honest letter that you have acquired a point of view above the misleading platitudes one usually hears about alcoholism. You see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum. Loosely translated, it refers to a spiritual experience is to counter addiction to the spirits. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I think that's pretty powerful. And if you'll think about your life, these are real experiences we have. I don't react the way I used to react. You know, I told you, I'm not saying it because I'm proud of it, but I told you I was married 6 times. But I want you to know I was married to my late wife, Linda, for over 31 years. And we were together over 33 years because my reaction to life and everything about it had changed because of what those old goats were willing to spend time with me and teach me right from wrong. I didn't do any of it on my own. I didn't know any of this stuff. And even when I first got into it, I didn't think it was going to work for me. So that tells you how brilliant I am. You know, does that answer what you were talking about last week? Now listen to what this says. Where I ended up reading. He says, upon hearing this, our friend, meaning Roland, was somewhat relieved, for he reflected that after all, he was a good church member. This hope, however, was destroyed by Dr. Jung telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. What he's saying is you and I are not going to go sit in church and find God. And that isn't going to happen for people like us. You know, when I first read steps 2 and 3, I wasn't very smart. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to have to go in there and sit on the bed until I believe. That wasn't going to happen to me. I was so prejudiced against God and religion. There's no way that was going to happen to me. And I'm telling you the truth, what happened to me. I knew I was powerless over alcohol. I knew my life was unmanageable. I skipped 2 and 3, and I said, I want to do 4. And my sponsor, being smarter than me, said, okay. And he gave me the instructions, and I did the 4th step. And then I called him, and I got together with him, and I took the 5th step. And then I skipped 6 and 7 for the same reason. I skipped 2 and 3, and I went to 8. And we had my list of my inventory, and I made the list of everybody I owed amends to. And then I went to my sponsor and told him what amends I owed to each person and why I thought I owed it. And then I went out and did my 9th step. I did my 5th step, my 9th day in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm just trying to tell you the way they did it in those days. You didn't wait around. They didn't say do it when you feel comfortable. You're better off doing it when you feel uncomfortable. You're more likely to be honest when you're up. The 5th and 9th were magical for me because I was an egomaniac, and doing those amends and telling all this stuff to my sponsor gave me a little bit of humility. And after I finished 9, I went back to 6 and 7. And after I finished 6 and 7, I went back to 2 and 3. I'm just telling you, that's the way I had to do it. But by the time I'd done that work, I did believe. If that makes any sense to any of you. I've often thought 2 and 3 ought to be way further up, but then they should, in the 12 and 12, it says Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't ask that I believe anything. It asks that I be willing to go through the process. Step 2 says, I came to believe. Well, I did. After a lot of work. But I hope this makes some of that stuff a little clearer. But I really want to say, okay, I'm going to go to page 28, and I'm going to read the second full paragraph. We, in our turn, sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. What seemed at first a flimsy reed had proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. A new life has been given us, or if you prefer, a design for living that really works. What he's talking about there is, in the packets that you guys, most of you got last week, and a couple of you got them tonight, there's a page, I think it's the last page in your packet, and it's entitled, What's the Hurry? You heard what I just read. And let's look at page.
Ray, we lost you. We can't hear you. Well, I think something with your.
I can't hear anything.
No, we can't hear him. Ray.
He's gone.
Same. Can't hear you, Ray.
Ray, your mic is not, we can't hear you. Maybe turn off your picture.
He doesn't even know that we can't hear him.
Yeah, I'm texting him.
Hey, Kim or Scott, can either of you unmute Ray? Looks like he was accidentally muted. Whoever has
don't-
host control.
This is Kim. I don't think that he is.
No, Ray's not muted.
He's not muted. I'm trying to call them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just so everyone knows, Ray is on a big book study on Thursday nights on Zoom, and I included all the information in the chat if you care to join.
Would you be willing to put it in again? Because I got booted out for a phone call. So it would be great if you could see
It's in the
that.
chat at the very beginning.
Right, but if you're not in a meeting, you lose the previous chats.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, of course. I'll do it right now.
Thank you very much.
Anyways, that's Joe and Charlie used to say, there's a certain sequence and rhythm to recovery. And what that meant is, don't take a step a month or a step a year. You're not going to get that rhythm. You're not going to get that sequence. It's not going to make sense to you. You're not going to see that step 12 is related to step 1, 2, 3, 4. This is one book. It's our story. It's all related. It isn't a whole bunch of different chapters that aren't related to each other. Does that make any sense? I've got a paper here that talks about all these things that you hear in meetings that the book states absolutely the opposite. Here it says, meeting makers make it. Page 59, paragraph 3. Here are the steps we took, which is suggested as a program of recovery. Meeting makers make it. Page 60, paragraph 0. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we didn't have a spiritual awakening because of the number of meetings we went to. I'm not going to try to irritate Pam, but I'm going to say it's not the meetings you make, it's the steps you take. Joe and Charlie used to say the quality of my sobriety is going to be directly related to the steps I take. And my sponsor used to say it to me this way. He said, Ray, your comfort in AA is to be dependent on your willingness to inconvenience yourself for Alcoholics Anonymous. Says, I'm powerless over people, places, and things. Page 132, paragraph 3. We have recovered and have been given the power to help others. Page 122, paragraph 3. Years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any wife or child neurotic. You know what a neurotic is? It's one who can ignore the obvious. I was a neurotic. On page 29, first full paragraph. Clear-cut directions are given showing how covered. They start in chapter 5 and go on from there. But isn't that pretty amazing? Many of you know through this program, and he was sober. When he came to me, he was sober, gosh, I don't know, I'm going to say 5 years. And his sponsor's a good guy, a guy with more time than me. And he came to me and he said, hey, Ray, would you take me through the big book? And I said, certainly, I'll take you through the big book. And we met in my home, you know, at least once a week. And I took him through the big book. And, you know, he went on his merry way. But he came back a while later. He kept in touch with me a lot. And anyway, he came back a while later. He said, you know, I never told you this, but I never knew that directions for the steps were in the book. I said, how'd you take the steps? He said, off the wall. His sponsor, who was sober a long, long time, somehow did the steps with him off the wall. Today, I sponsor that same man for many years now. But I'm just saying to you, if you do the work out of this big book, you cannot fail. If you really do the work out of this big book, you are going to end up happy. I don't know if you'll be rich, poor, single, married, what, but you will be happy. And I've never seen it fail once in over 46 years. And to me, that's a pretty good batting average. Is what we're talking about starting to make sense to you guys, how this is all related?
Yes.
Did anybody from the homework assignment, did anybody have any comment they wanted to make from reading Bill's story?
Ray, Jim has his hand up.
Does anybody have any question about what we've talked about today?
Hey Ray, this is your buddy Tom.
Doing my job.
Can you hear me?
Tom, I don't think he can hear you.
Okay.
Explains it more thoroughly what that means. Because I know years ago when I'd go through it, I thought, oh, okay, 6 and 7. Yeah, take away my bad, thanks a lot. And I never thought more. How did you learn your defects? Like, I know so much more now than I did when I just read through that one couple of paragraphs.
Well, remember the guys that took me through this were very experienced guys. And he told me, I'll tell you how he first told them to me. He said, step 6 is don't do what you want to do, because I always wanted to react. And he said, step 7 is do what you don't want to do, which is do the proper thing. But he told me the principles are the opposite of my character defects. Now, remember, he made my list of defects when I went through step 5 with him. He had a whole set of them.
You didn't, okay.
Self-pity was on top. I had to write a gratitude list for a year. Every day I had to call him with my gratitude list. At the end of a year, he said, how's the self-pity? I said, I don't have any. He said, no kidding. He said, God must have taken it while you were reading those lists to me. So,
So you
and
got-
and there's another book that describes it even better than the 12 and 12. It's called Drop the Rock. And Bill says in there, he has a list of how we're trying to change from whatever the defect is to whatever the principle is.
way back then, we just read 6 and 7. You said your sponsor wrote the defects while you were talking.
Or he had all my defects down.
Okay.
I wasn't very good. He knew the exact nature of my wrong. I didn't always know the exact nature of my wrong, but I guarantee you, he never missed it. So,
Question real quick.
yeah,
Sorry, Ray, I'm Benjamin. The question is, when in Bill's story, when he says he acquainted with his friend, he acquainted his life or his story to his friend Abby. It was just by like spoken, or they didn't write nothing, right? It was,
they didn't have, remember, there was no steps then. What the 6 tenets that the Oxford group had, I'm gonna kind of give you a general idea of what they were. They're on page, this isn't even exactly the way that the Oxford group did it, because remember, the Oxford group wasn't for alcoholics, they were for anybody that. So they were complete deflation, dependence on higher power, moral inventory, confession, rested. In our 12 steps. You know, the